The MG 1428 was one of the first proper MG models when it launched in 1924, though Cecil Kimber was mostly just taking Morris Oxford chassis from the factory and fitting his own coachwork. The basic chassis came from Cowley, got mildly modified, the engine received a light tune, and then it got aluminium body panels painted in two colors.
Early cars had bolt-on artillery wheels with disc covers, later ones got wire spokes. From late 1924 you got front-wheel brakes, fairly advanced for the time. The engine was an 1816 four-cylinder side valve that pushed the car to about 65 miles per hour. Suspension used half-elliptic leaf springs at the front and three-quarter elliptics at the rear.
A fabric-bodied saloon version appeared in 1926. They built around 400 before the 1440 replaced it in 1927. Now there's maybe 21 left. Most people have never heard of this one, even if they know MG, completely overshadowed by the sportier models that came later.
In 1931, MG needed something to sit between the tiny M-type midget and their bigger 1890 model. What they came up with was the F-type Magna, a six-cylinder sports car with a 1271cc overhead cam engine. The engine was essentially a Wolseley Hornet unit with extra cylinders, though MG tried hiding this with dummy covers over the block.
It made 37.2 brake horsepower initially, but they later bumped that to 47 by tweaking the valve timing. The chassis was stretched from the D-type by 10 inches to fit the longer engine and extra rear seats. With its sloping radiator and long bonnet, the F-type could hit 70 miles per hour. Around 1250 were built between 1931 and 1932. Many were sold as bare chassis to coach builders like Abbey and Jarvis, who fitted their own bodies. The Offen type got overshadowed by more famous racing models that came after. But at the time, it was MG's fastest-selling six-cylinder car of the 1930s.
The K3 Magnet from 1933 was the most successful British racing car of its era, yet most people have never heard of it. MG built just 33 over 2 years, and they dominated their class across Europe. The supercharged 1.087-liter six-cylinder engine sat at an angle with a Marshall blower mounted in front of the radiator.
This setup produced 120 horsepower at 6,500 revs, remarkable for barely over a liter. The clever bit was the Wilson pre-selector gearbox, which let you choose your next gear in advance and then tap the clutch to shift. Complicated downshifts became unnecessary.
Tazio Nuvolari drove one to victory at the 1933 Ulster Tourist Trophy, beating the class lap record 7 times. Another K3 won its class at the Mille Miglia that same year. These were genuine international victories against Italian machinery, yet today everyone remembers the T-Series Roadsters instead.
You could buy one for £795, and some privateers did.
The MG SAT turned up in 1936 and was probably the least MG-like car the company ever made. This thing was a full-size luxury saloon riding on a 123-inch wheelbase, absolutely massive by MG standards.
Under the bonnet, you got a 2.3-liter six-cylinder engine from Wolseley that had been given the MG treatment to squeeze out 85 miles per hour. The body was proper coach-built with 4 doors, leather seats everywhere, walnut trim, and the usual MG grille stuck between big chrome headlights.
It looked quite smart with that long bonnet and low roofline, but at 375 pounds it competed against the SS Jaguar, which offered similar looks for 20% less. The whole project happened because MG had been swallowed by Morris Motors, and someone upstairs decided they should try the luxury market.
They built 2,739 between 1936 and 1939, then quietly gave up. It just didn't fit what people wanted from an MG badge.
The MGWA arrived in 1938 as the biggest and most luxurious car Abingdon had ever built. It looked a lot like the SA, but had a wider rear track, which meant more interior space for passengers. Under that long bonnet sat a 2.6-liter six-cylinder engine producing about 100 brake horsepower.
The car came in 3 body styles: a 4-door saloon at 442 pounds, a Tickford drophead coupe at 468 pounds, and a 4-seater tour at 450 pounds. Most buyers went for the saloon with about 297 built, 52 drophead coupes, and 9 tours.
Inside the WA was wonderfully appointed with leather bucket seats, a wooden dashboard, and octagonal instruments. But it faced a problem. It cost only £3 less than a Jaguar 3.5-liter and couldn't quite match that car's performance. When war broke out in 1939, production stopped immediately.
Only about 369 examples were ever made. This marked the end of MG's attempt to compete in the luxury saloon market.
The MGY type arrived in May 1947, about 18 months after the TC sports car had already grabbed everyone's attention. This was MG's first post-war saloon, and it looked properly old-fashioned, with separate fenders and a narrow body that belonged to the 1930s rather than the late 40s.
Underneath it used bits from the humble Morris 8 with a swept tail and longer bonnet grafted on. The motoring press defended this as classic British styling, but everyone knew it was dated from launch day. That said, under the old-fashioned shell, you got some genuinely modern engineering.
The Y-type was the first production MG, with independent front suspension and rack and pinion steering, which meant it handled surprisingly well for a small saloon. The engine was the 1250cc X-PAG unit from the TC, but with just a single carburetor instead of two, so you got decent performance, but nothing spectacular.
Production ran until 1953 with over 8,000 built altogether, split between YA saloons, the rare open YT Tourer, and the improved YB from 1952. It sold respectably enough, but hardly anyone mentions it today because the TC gets all the glory.
The Magnet ZA turned up at the 1953 London Motor Show and confused people expecting an MG sports car. This was a four-door saloon with a roof, roll-up windows, leather seats, and wood trim. Gerald Palmer designed it, having previously worked on the Jowett Javelin.
It was MG's first monocoque and debuted the B-Series engine, a 1489 cubic centimeter four-cylinder making 60 horsepower. Under the skin, it shared plenty with the Wolseley 4/44 and later Riley models, though MG lowered the suspension and tuned it sportier. Top speed was 79.7 miles per hour.
0 to 60 took 23.1 seconds. Decent for a 1500cc saloon then. In 1956, the ZB arrived with 68 horsepower from bigger carbs and higher compression. You could get a Veritone model with two-tone paint and a larger rear window.
The trouble was, it drove well but didn't feel like an MG, and BMC was spreading the same basic design across multiple badges by the late 50s. Production stopped in 1958.
The Magnet Mark III appeared in 1959 and immediately disappointed anyone who cared about what MG stood for. This was badge engineering at its most cynical. BMC had designed a new family saloon range penned by Italian stylist Farina, and they churned out 5 different versions wearing Austin, Morris, Wolseley, Riley, and MG badges.
The Magnet was just an Austin Cambridge with twin carburetors and an MG grille stuck on the front. Worse yet, it wasn't even built at Abingdon by MG workers, but at Cali, on the same production line as the Austin and Morris versions.
The old ZA and ZB Magnets had been proper sports saloons with rack and pinion steering, firm suspension, and a squat, purposeful stance. This new one had soft springs, vague cam and lever steering, and sat too high on narrow tracks. It looked boxy and handled accordingly. The Mark IV from 1962 improved things slightly with a bigger engine, wider track, and anti-roll bars. But the damage was done. These cars limped on until 1968. They represented MG's lowest point, a complete surrender of identity to corporate bean counting.
The NG 1100 arrived in September 1962 as BMC's sporting take on Alec Isagonis's clever AD016. It had the same transverse 1098cc A-Series engine as the Austin and Morris versions, but with twin SU carbs pushing out 55 brake horsepower.
You got front disc brakes, that innovative hydroelastic suspension connecting the front wheels to the back through pressurized fluid, and genuinely sharp handling for a family saloon. In 1967, it gained the option of a 1275cc engine and quickly became the MG 1300.
Two-door and four-door bodies were offered, with most two doors going to America where BMC hoped it would conquer the small car market. It didn't, managing just 28,000 sales there over 5 years. Though back home it shifted around 120,000 examples before disappearing in 1971. The trouble is, nobody really cares about it now. It was genuinely good to drive and technically advanced, but it's seen as just another badge job, one of those BMC exercises and sticking different grills on the same car. Collectors ignore it completely despite the octagon in the bonnet.
The MG Metro arrived in May 1992 as British Leyland's attempt to keep the MG badge alive after shutting down Abingdon. What you got was essentially an Austin Metro with a lightly tweaked 1.3-liter A-Series engine pushing out 71 brake horsepower, which doesn't sound like much now, but it was enough to make the thing feel zippy around town.
The steering was sharp, and you could chuck it about like a go-kart, which made it genuinely fun to drive, even if it wasn't actually fast. 0 to 60 took 12.2 seconds.
But then just 7 months later, they launched the Metro Turbo with 93 horsepower, and that basically made this one look a bit pointless. And when you put it against the Golf GTI or Peugeot 205 GTI, it really showed how much British Leyland had compromised to keep costs down.
The MG Maestro turned up in 1983 as Austin Rovers go at making their everyday 5-door hatchback exciting. The first version came with a 1.6-liter engine fitted with twin Weber carburetors that was rushed into production way too fast.
It spent most of its time backfiring, stalling, and flooding, which made dealers absolutely miserable trying to sort it out. About 15,000 were built before they switched to a proper 2-liter fuel-injected engine in October '84 that actually ran properly. The real story, though, was the turbo that arrived in 1988.
It had around 150 brake horsepower officially, though rumors suggest closer to 170. That made it the fastest front-wheel drive car available at the time and genuinely quick in a straight line. The trouble was, it looked like a pensioner's shopping car with a body kit stuck on.
Only 49 were made in black. Now it's a punchline, rather than something people get excited about.
The MG Montego arrived in 1984 as the 4-door saloon version of the Maestro, stretching the same basic platform to take on the Sierra and Cavalier. British Leyland had high hopes for this one as a proper family car, but it suffered the same rush development that plagued the Maestro. Build quality was genuinely shocking initially.
That made it properly quick, hitting 60 in under 8 seconds. Problem was, the boxy styling and cheap interior meant it never escaped accusations of blandness. Only about 7,276 turbos were built between 85 and 91. Today the Montego is even more forgotten than the Maestro.
Barely anyone discusses it when talking about 80s hot saloons, despite being genuinely rapid when it worked.
In 1992, Rover decided to dig up the long-dead MGB and give it another go. The company had been watching Mazda sell MX-5s by the bucket load and figured there was money in simple roadsters. Their new mid-engined MGF wouldn't be ready until 1995, so they needed something to fill the gap.
British Motor Heritage was already building MGB body shells for the restoration market, so Rover's Special Products division took those shells and made something new. They widened the arches, fitted Porsche 911 headlamps, added color-matched bumpers, and dropped in the 3.9-liter Rover V8, making 190 horses.
Today, it's more of a curiosity than a collectible.
The MG FVVC arrived in early 99.6 as the hot version of Rover's mid-engine sports car comeback. The VVC bit stood for variable valve control, which was fitted to the 1.8-liter K-Series engine to squeeze out an extra 25 horsepower over the standard car.
The system constantly adjusted when the inlet valves opened and closed, depending on engine speed, giving you 145 brake horsepower at 7,000 RPM. It made the little mid-engine roadster properly quick, hitting 100 kilometers per hour in roughly 7 seconds. The problem was the engine itself.
Rover had stretched the K-Series beyond what it was happy with, and the VVC cars were notorious for head gasket failures and overheating issues. The complex Hydroga suspension could also fail, leaving you with expensive repair bills. The car handled brilliantly and offered genuine thrills when it worked, but reliability concerns killed its reputation.
By the time MG Rover launched the updated TF model in 2002, the VVC's damage was done. Decent examples are affordable now, but you need to know the car's history before buying one.
The MG ZS 180 arrived in 2000 Dandone as MG Rover's attempt to prove they could still build a proper sports saloon.
This one was based on the fairly unremarkable Rover 45, but you wouldn't know it to look at it.
They fitted a mesh grille up front, stuck a massive rear wing on the back, lowered the whole thing on stiffened suspension, and threw in some imposing alloy wheels. Under the bonnet sat a 2.5-liter V6 borrowed from the bigger Rover 75, producing 175 horsepower.
That was enough to shove the ZS to 60 in just over 7 seconds and onto a top speed of, anyway, 113 miles per hour. The handling was genuinely sharp too, with a quick steering rack and uprated anti-roll bars front and rear.
You got a close ratio gearbox with a short throw shift and a sports exhaust that actually sounded decent. At around 16,000 pounds, it was brilliant value compared to hot hatches from Ford or Vauxhall. The problem was build quality. Trim panels rattled, switches felt cheap, and things broke.
The ZS-180 faded from memory almost instantly, which is a shame because underneath the dodgy assembly, it was a genuinely entertaining driver's car that most people have now completely forgotten about.
The MG X-Power SV was MG Rover's attempt at building a supercar in the early 2000s when they were already skint. They bought Italian maker Qvale's assets in 2000 for 7 million quid. This gave them the Qvale Mangusta platform, a carbon fiber sports car that nobody particularly wanted.
Peter Stevens, who designed the McLaren F1, restyled it into something more aggressive, all bulging arches and a massive rear wing. The result had a Ford Mustang V8 under the bonnet, making 320 horsepower in standard form, or 385 in the SVR.
It could hit 175 miles per hour and do 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds, which was genuinely quick. The trouble was, it cost 65,000 pounds to start, climbing over 80,000 for the R. Build quality was questionable too. Bodies were molded in Britain, assembled in Italy, then finished at Longbridge, which was asking for problems.
Only 82 were built before MG Rover went bust in 2005. It's been called the machine that broke 3 car companies, which seems a bit harsh, but it certainly didn't help any of them.